I have just finished the last stage of Tour Britannia, an insane racing series from Flamme Rouge Racing in which you do 8 hard races within 9 days. And let me tell you one thing, it was an experience I will never forget. For those of you who don't know, FRR events are pretty much the most brutal racing you can do on Zwift. The races are very hard, there is a lot of them packed into a very short time frame, the competition is fierce, the rules are very strict, and the format is designed in a way that if you let your guard down even for just one brief moment, you are out of competition. But more on that later. Because I have to admit, just a few days before the start I knew pretty much nothing about this stage race. I guess I was aware that it existed, but nothing beyond that. But then after Zwift Unlocked concluded, there was a week in which I didn't know what I would do, and Steven actually messaged me he was considering doing Tour Britannia. And after deep and careful 2-minute consideration, I told him I was in. So I filled out the registration and briefly went over the rules. And the world briefly does some very heavy lifting here, because boy would I regret not reading the rules carefully later. But I did notice 2 things. First of all, that the rules are very strict. There is no steering, no power-ups, everyone is forced to use the same bike, and if your performance is a little too good, you can expect an anti-doping check, which in the environment of indoor cycling means submitting videos of your weight and height, equipment and more. Secondly, this racing series uses neither Zwift Racing Score nor the original pace groups. It has its own 10 categories that are based on your velo, a number that you can find for yourself on a website zwiftracing.app. And it is not just your current velo, it is your 30-day best, so sandbagging before this event won't help you either. Based on this number you are assigned in one of 10 categories and you are forced to race in it, and if you are not, you are heavily penalized. The only way from that assigned category is up. If your velo crosses a pre-announced threshold during the event, you are upgraded into higher category. For the race organization purposes, those 10 categories are then split into 5 pens that start one after another in 2-minute intervals. Apart from this 2-minute split, everyone races together, which means that if you are dropped, you can continue with the next group. My category for this racing series was Carolina Reaper or CRP, the 3rd highest racing category. Like I already mentioned, there were 8 stages, 3 climbing stages, 2 hilly stages, 1 flat crit course, 1 flat time trial and 1 hilly time trial. As it is usually the case in stage races, you can fight either in the general classification, mountain classification, sprint, or if you want points classification, and then there is a combined classification that mixes all those together. I decided to go for the GC this time because that's something I've never done before. And with all that being said, I can jump straight into how the race went, because although that wasn't all there was to the rules, it was all I knew about them at this point. Stage number 1 was being held on London Triple Loops course, 41 kilometers with over 500 meters of climbing. The first half of this race was being held in the flat parts of downtown London, which meant the pace was very easy, almost too easy actually. Apart from some sections, I was basically riding in zone 2. It was clear though that would end the second we would hit the first of the 2 climbs, Light Hill. And sure enough, once we hit the foot of the climb, the effort skyrocketed. In terms of wattage, I needed to go into high 300s just to be able to follow the front riders, and it didn't really ease up very much until the end of the climb. After 5 minutes of climbing, I had averaged 330 watts and we were still on the less steep part of the climb. The decisive moment of the first race happened once we hit the steepest section of Light Hill. Young Rainier from Canada attacked, and since the guy is 57 kilos, he quickly left us in the dust. And here I need to mention one thing. I should have tried to follow this attack, even though I was pretty deep at this point. My thought process was such that even if this guy did gain time in the climbing race, he would probably lose some in the flatter ones and in the time trial. But at this point, I did not know that's not how this race works. But I will go into specifics a little later. So the front guy is gone, but most of us are actually pretty compacted together. It was only near the end of the climb where a few of the guys actually started to split from me, and I am not ashamed that happened, because for the 12 minutes it took to climb this I averaged 335 watts, which was by far my best performance for around this duration. I was now 7 seconds behind the trio of the riders that dropped me, but I didn't give up just yet. I knew they would probably ease up now, so I started chasing, and after a little bit of an effort, I was back in the group. And now I would have about 5 minutes to rest before the second climb, Box Hill. Unfortunately, I went really deep on the first one, and at the start of the Box Hill I felt my legs were pretty dead. And sure enough, I found myself at the end of the climbing train, but at this point, I was still mainly focusing on myself and not the guys in front of me. I finished the climb on the 4th place overall, and now it was only downhill back to London. I didn't push on the way back because I considered the top 3 guys already gone. Once again, I really underestimated how much does really the time difference matter. And I know I'm really teasing the inner workings of this race, but it has its reason, just give me a little more time. So to conclude stage number 1, I finished on 6th place, which didn't matter whatsoever, but what did matter was the time gap behind the leader, and that was 1 minute and 37 seconds. What should have probably tripped me was when I looked at the GC standings after stage 1 and saw 7 different leaders despite them having different times. But at that point, I thought that was just some sort of a glitch. Stage number 2 brought us the climbiest experience of the week. Also Surrey route with a custom finish atop the Light Hill, so there were 6 big climbs on this one, and the first one right after the start. The sequence was following: Fox Hill, Light Hill, Box Hill, Keith Hill, and then Fox Hill and Light Hill again. That setup was promising us with a lot of suffering, and the first hill was no exception. The effort was very high and it was led mainly by 2 riders, once again Jan Grenier and Jason Cook. Remember those 2 names because they decided they would torture us on this route. Near the top, Jan went and once again rode away, and there were few more riders who briefly split from the group, but the group reunited on the descent, and after a little bit of chase we caught up Jan as well. And shortly after that, there was a time for the next climb, Light Hill. The tempo wasn't as severe as the day before, but you need to realize there were basically 6 climbs in a row, so it couldn't have been. But then we hit the steepest section of the climb and it was basically a photocopy of what happened the day before. Jason attacked and Jan followed, and very quickly both of them left us behind. For Jason that was probably a little too much though, because he very quickly fell back to the group, while Jan was gone. At this point it looked like the race was over, Jan was long gone, but the rest of the group finished the second climb together. And that was a good thing, because spoiler alert, Jan put on such a performance he was promoted out of our category after this race, and that actually saved the GC ambitions of all of us. Third climb, Box Hill, and the scenario repeats. Jason goes and the group except one other guy is unable to follow. At the top we were losing over 20 seconds to Jason as the current leader of our pen. We also managed to catch up to Steven that was at this point riding alone for almost half the race and putting really heroic effort. Nothing was decided yet though, because once we hit the 4th climb of the day, it was clear we were gaining time back on Jason, and about 2/3 in we managed to catch him. So at the top of Keith Hill and especially on the downhill section after, the group was back together. What was funny though was that Jason went once again, and this time he didn't even wait for the next climb, he simply rode away on the descent. And this time it worked, because the moment we hit the Fox Hill the guy had 45 seconds advantage. I admit I didn't understand the attack at the time, but it was really executed perfectly. On the 5th climb nothing really exciting happened, the effort was fairly high but manageable, and we reached the top as a pretty compact chaser group of 9. And now the time has come for one last uphill effort, 2nd attempt at the Light Hill. At this point it was clear that if nothing bad happens to Jason we are not catching him, but the question was what would be his final advantage. We didn't really push super hard until the steep section, by which point Jason already had a lead of 1 minute and 20 seconds. And I have to say, I put out a pretty honest effort at the end. There were a few more guys in front of me, but as you will see in a little bit, that really didn't matter. The only thing that matters was the separation to the winner. A little final push and I finished the race on 6th place with a 1 minute and 5 seconds of the loss to the winner, Jason Cook. Like I said, Jan Grenier won the race by more than 5 minutes and got promoted, which means his result didn't count in our category. After this stage I took a look at the results and I already knew I was missing something. I was on a 29th spot, but my overall time was actually better than the one of the current leaders. And boy, was I really missing something. The thing is, the general classification and FRR races isn't based on your cumulative time like you would expect, but by what they call an eGAP. When you finish a race, you get an eGAP that's equivalent to your time difference to a race winner, which means that if you finish 1 minute behind the winner, you get 1 minute of eGAP. And the GC is based, you guessed it, on the lowest cumulative eGAP. And you might be wondering why. Well, exactly so smartasses like me cannot do exactly the thing I plan to do. Ride consistently well-populated races, drafting well and finishing with most of the bunch. With eGAP, it does not matter that you finish second if that second place is minutes after the winner. It is actually a super well-designed system that basically forces you to race actively, follow attacks and place attacks on your own. Because once you have already accumulated eGAP, it is almost impossible to decrease it. You can then only fight to not lose more and also force others in your pen to gain some. Long story short, after 2 stages I had an eGAP of 2 minutes and 37 seconds, which meant I was already heavily disadvantaged to the guys in front of me. But as difficult as it is, there is a way for you to get that time back. And that's during time trials, which bring us to stage number 3. This was a flat time trial, but the longest one I've ever done, Greatest London Flat. And it was super important for me to place well here, because time trials are the only way for you to attack all riders that are competing. See the way the eGAP works? In normal stages, even if you win, you increase eGAP of only those riders that were directly racing you, but not of those racing different time slots. Which means that if you want to gain time to some specific rider, you need to enter the same pen they race and then hope to beat them. Time trials are different in this regard. There are no pens, all riders race together and the eGAP is calculated based on all times raced, not just the ones in your time slot. So it is your only opportunity to directly attack all your competitors, not just those racing in your time slots. So for this one specifically, I chose a target average power somewhere around 290 to 95 watts, because I estimated it would take about 45 minutes to complete this race, and I felt that was a target I perceived as realistic to hit on tired legs. Since this was a fairly flat course too, I plan to stay as consistent with the power output as possible. The only exception would be the little ramps in the countryside, where I would actually go over the threshold to keep the momentum. And that went fairly well until around 15 minutes in, where I felt my power started to slip a little bit. I basically went down to around 260 watts, while still feeling equally bad as I did on full power. But I had a strong support in the chat and I kept reminding myself any sort of weakness here can lose me the GC, so I kept pushing. And like in many occasions in Zwift racing, it proved to be a mental thing, because once we entered the countryside I caught a second wind and was even able to go beyond 300 watts on the inclines. After the first ramp, I even noticed I somewhat started dropping the second CRP guy in this race, Beto Barros from Portugal. By the way, we've had a great friendly competition with this guy and his team in this series, as we usually raced in the same time slot. And that was actually my fuel for the rest of the race. On the biggest ramp, I actually pushed well over my target, gained few more seconds of advantage, and then there was time to get back to London. And I was tired by this point, but I also knew I was going to win my category in this time slot, and seeing the gap getting bigger and bigger really helped me to push. In the end, I averaged exactly 295 watts as I planned and indeed won my category in this time slot. But as happy as I was with this result, in other time slots there were better riders, the best one actually being exactly 1 minute faster, and that meant my eGAP grew once again. That was the case for most riders though, and that meant I moved up in the GC to 23rd spot. After the time trial we've had one free day, but then it was time to jump back into what turned out to be the craziest, most strategic stage of them all. 10 laps on Glasgow Crit. As I said in the beginning, there was a 2-minute difference in between each starting pen. But because this course is so short and you are doing 10 laps on it, what inherently happened was the fastest group started lapping the slower ones and the riders from different categories started to mix and match. which brought interesting possibilities for the lower categories. When you are lapped by faster group and you feel good, you can easily jump in the draft of that group and ride away, but then you would ultimately need to do one lap alone. For this reason, there was a lot of nervous energy in the group and no one really wanted to do something crazy. I mainly made sure I'm not caught off guard on the Clyde kickers, because if you sleep there, you can get easily dropped. I knew there wouldn't be big differences in the eGAP in a race this flat, but I wanted to make at least a mental dent to others. And shortly before the end there was a great opportunity. We were just lapping the group of E category guys, so I tried to hide in their group and launched a longer sprint from among them. And it sort of worked. Basically just one guy from our group reacted. I don't know if others didn't notice or didn't care about losing few seconds, but I finished this race on second place with no change in my eGAP. The stage number 5 couldn't have been more different. It was being held on Yorkshire double loop course, which is basically never flat. It's consistently either up or down, which means a lot of punchy efforts, which I like. But I definitely didn't like the one at the start. There was a KOM segment immediately after start, which means that this climb was challenged not only by GC contenders, but also the polka dot jersey competitors. But you never know which one is which. And the effort here was insane. At the top of the climb there was already like 5 seconds difference. The only good news was the guys eased up, so after a little bit of a chase the group was back together. And that was the case until what's the most disgusting ramp on this map. It is not crazy long, but it has super steep gradients right from the start. And that means that the real punchers really go insane on it. You basically need to go close to all out to not get dropped. And so I did, and so did 7 other riders. We arrived at the top with about 10 seconds of gap to the chasers, and we somewhat tried to maintain it. But then there is a long descent back to Harrogate, and no one really wanted to push hard with what was coming after that, so at the end of the descent we got caught. After that the race was basically uneventful until the next KOM, where the split of the group was unavoidable. I just focused on maintaining as hard of a power that wouldn't put me in the risk of bonking. To not make this any longer, we entered the final climb in a group of 4 and I had a great feeling about this. I knew I'm now allowed to really rip it if necessary, so my plan here was to ride the draft for as long as possible to make others work and then rip it on the last steep section. And it played out perfectly. The pace wasn't super crazy, so I was able to accelerate pretty fast and brought home my first FRR victory, and no further addition to my eGAP. After stage 5 I was 18th in the GC, and what was coming was my biggest chance to bring some time. And that's because stage 6 was a long hilly time trial during which I planned to materialize on my ability to sustain fairly high power for a long time, as well as make up as much time as possible by pacing it correctly, pushing hard on the hills and recovering on the descents. Those of you who watched my stream know that this wasn't my lucky day. I didn't have any dry kit, so I needed to use old one that was about 2 sizes too large. Just before the race my heart rate strap gave up and woke up only with 1 minute to go, and I forgot to bring my drink bottle only to drop it once my wife brought it to me. But still, I tried to execute what I had planned as well as possible. That was to keep around 290 watts on average, with spikes of about 320 to 350 on the climbs. And it honestly went pretty well. All things considered, I felt reasonably strong, and once again, I eventually moved in front of all other racers in my category and started chasing even those of category above. Once all the climbing was done, I locked into as steady power as possible, and at the end I ramped it up as much as I could. I made a mistake though. I thought the custom finish was at the sprint banner, but it was actually about 100 meters further down the street, so I lost few seconds there. But despite that, I once again won my category in my time slot, and I was very happy with that. All riders taken into consideration, I finished the race on 10th place and gained another 42 seconds of eGAP. The penultimate race took place on one of my most favorite courses on Zwift, 2 laps of Muckle, which meant for ascents of Sgur Summit. And I need to say that until the last climb the race was pretty easy. Even the Sgur climbs were very manageable. So much so that I actually decided to give Steven lead out on his second sprint of the day, because he was seriously competing for the green jersey in his category. I started planning my own attack on the finals girl climb if the pace was once again mellow, but it turns out I didn't need to worry about that one. Right on the bottom of the climb there was a huge attack by several guys that I needed to cover with some pretty big power numbers, only to be thrown into another one from Andre Sousa right before the summit. With that being covered, all that was left was a descent back to Glasgow, and at this point I knew there wouldn't be huge differences in eGAP from this race. Not that I thought the pain was over, I fully expected one more attack on the Clyde kicker. I was fairly confident I would cover that one, but I knew it would hurt a lot. And sure enough, at the base of the climb Andre placed another attack. And not just any attack, this was a nuclear attack. I needed to output over 12 watts per kilo to not get dropped. I had no interest in pushing past Clyde kicker though, so the group got back together and it was clear it was going to be another sprint showdown. And although it probably didn't make a lot of sense to wreck my legs, I just felt I wanted to go for it just for the fun. I finished second with 9 thousandths of a second difference to the winner, and I could happily go to the last stage from 12th spot and 3 minutes and 11 seconds of eGAP. And what last stage it was! 2 laps of Royal Pump Room 8 on a Yorkshire map, which translated into roughly an hour and a half of pure, unfiltered suffering. That was clear right from the start that it was going to be the case. The energy in the group couldn't have been more different than the one in stage 7. They were basically 4 GC contenders in this group that were realistically fighting for top 10. Jason Cook, that you might remember from stage 2, Jan Bezel, that is an exquisite and light climber, and Beto Barros, who got promoted into our group just before this race, and even with the time penalty he was firmly in top 10. And then me. During the warm-up I said my goal in this race was to make as many people as miserable as possible. As it turns out, I didn't need to do that, those guys and their teammates were doing that for me. And also to me. Yes, all those 3 guys had their domestiques with them and I was flying behind them as a kite on a rope. I cannot even describe what was happening in this race with words. There was attack after attack after attack, mainly from Jason, but in the rare occasions where he chilled out, the other 2 teams took the reins in their quest to make us hate our lives. And very quickly in the race I understood that my GC top 10 ambitions were hanging by a thread. Even if I had the strength to attack those guys, which honestly didn't feel really likely in this pace, their teams would break their legs to bring the attack back. I felt a tiny bit of a hope on the steepest ramp though. As it was the case in stage 5, even here the effort got super crazy and we actually managed to drop Jason here. I'm not sure if he just overdone it at the front or if those punchy climbs are not his forte, but that was a slight promise for the finish of the race. That was just one guy though, the 2 others did that one splendidly and it didn't look like Jason gave up either, quite the contrary. He bounced back into the group very quickly just to subject us into another few rounds of pain. And that was happening again, and again, and again, and again. Anyway, at the top of the last KOM we were still together and it was clear that the race would be decided on the last steep ramp. And at this point I really didn't look forward to it because I would really need to see the god just in order to not throw away everything I worked for during those 8 stages. But I also knew that this was probably the last hard effort of this whole series and that knowledge always makes the suffering a little easier simply because you know it's going to stop soon. I went really hard, probably very close to as hard as I was able to, but it wasn't enough. Jan was flying away with his domestique and it was clear that guy would make me lose time. Beto was with me at this point and Jason was dropped once again on the ramp, so the resulting situation was pretty average I would say. Anyway, I rode to the finish line with the 2 gas guys and since I recovered fairly well on the downhill, I decided to rip one extra sprint at the end. I finished stage 8 on nice 3rd spot, but I got another 29 seconds penalty towards my eGAP and that meant my top 10 dream was gone. I finished my first FRR stage race on 12th spot with 3 minutes and 32 seconds lost throughout the 8 stages. To put things into perspective, out of those 3 minutes and 32 seconds, I lost 2 minutes and 37 seconds during the first 2 stages in which I didn't know how eGAP works. So that's one big takeaway point. Always read the rules of the competition carefully, guys. It really is worth it. All in all though, it was an incredible experience. I've never had so much fun racing as during Tour Britannia. I love that there are rigid rules, I love they use Velo as their rating of choice, and I love the concept of eGAP as it promotes very active racing. What surprised me the most though was how quickly my body adjusted to consistently high efforts. After stages 1 and 2, I was beaten down, I was falling asleep in the evening and I felt horrible before the next stages. At the end of the series though, my body bounced back very quickly from the previous day's effort and I was starting the last stage actually pretty fresh. That's it for today. If you are a seasoned racer, definitely give this event a go. There's going to be another one in early January that I will be doing. And if you are new to Zwift and you are still learning things, check out my video where I share my top 26 tips relating to Zwifting.